Hi friends. So a couple weeks ago, I was inebriated and shopping on eBay at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I may or may not have accidentally ordered a lot of previously owned Scientology material, and I may or may not have spent the last few weeks going through it. All right, so Scientology. Let's just dive in because this is gonna be a thing. And originally, I had a very long video planned for this. I spent the last couple of days writing a script out and the whole 9 yards. Ultimately, I've decided not to do that for a lot of reasons. One of which I'm sure you can guess. The church would not take kindly to somebody like me going through their material and comparing it to other religions or other occult traditions, which was really what I was excited about, because Scientology is loaded with occult stuff. It is rooted in rooted in the occult rather. We know that L. Ron Hubbard spent time hanging down in the southern parts of California with Jack Parsons and some other folks studying OTO material a couple of years before he wrote Dianetics and started Scientology. We know that he is a part of the occult scene, so I don't feel like it's overstepping to be curious about the things that he did with the information and with the work or the technology that was afforded to him during his time studying the occult and specifically the OTO. So I've always been curious about Scientology. It comes from a very honest, natural place. I'm an occultist, so the occult just fascinates me in general. I am a sci-fi person and I write sci-fi on the side. So of course, this guy who is a reformed occultist / cult leader who's also a science fiction author, that was all very fascinating to me. I'm also into self-help. I really believe in the power of sharing wisdom, and I'm a spiritual seeker. And so a lot of stuff that gets talked about with Scientology is really quite fascinating to me. And I have been interested in what's going on inside of Scientology for well over a decade, probably 2 decades at this point. So allegedly, it is a dangerous cult, and I will say that a quick Google search, if you just type in things like suppressive person, Scientology, if you type in where's Shelley, Scientology, if you type in human rights abuses, Scientology, rape, Scientology, there's a lot of things that you could type in Scientology in Google, and you're going to get a lot of responses, all of which are going to share and spread light on some of the behavior that goes on inside of the church with its members, people in Sea Org, and people who are kind of running the show. The everyday Scientologist, however, the person who's showing up, taking courses, things like that, those people are actually pretty much, I want to kind of, I think of them as innocents in a lot. I think of them as people who are caught up in something that is bigger than them, and that, especially after reading the material and going through some of the processes and things that they do, I could very easily see how somebody who is just a good intentioned person who wants the world to be a better place, who genuinely wants that and genuinely wants to put their energy into an organization that can make the world a better place. I could see them being attracted to Scientology. I could see them being attracted to the teachings, especially early on, of L. Ron Hubbard. Those things there's actually a lot of cool stuff in there. I mean, just we strip all the ick out of the organizational structure, the people and things like that, and we just kind of get to what draws people into Scientology. It's actually a lot of really good material here. Dianetics itself, I mean, there's a lot of problems with it, don't get me wrong, but a lot of that fundamental stuff that they talk about in the beginning of Scientology is a lot of stuff that we do in self-help. It's a lot of the stuff that we do, especially in the occult. And then when we get into things like auditing and other aspects of Scientology itself, we can really see a lot of similarities to things like the Goetia and things like that. I was just talking to my husband about that this morning. So there's true, in my opinion, being an occultist and having the background that I do, it is true to say that there are a lot of things that we are like working towards in the occult, whether it's you're doing a self-study thing or you're working in an order. There's a lot of that like shadow work stuff, a lot of the making yourself essentially a better person, learning how to work in a world that is kind of constructed to be disparaging or constructed in a way where there's a lot of imbalances between you and the overculture, things like that. There's all stuff that we talk about in occultism. It's all stuff that we talk about in the craft. So when it shows up all throughout Scientology, I'm not at all surprised. I'm also not at all surprised that people are interested in those things. If you are an occultist and you've been practicing, you have your own way of thinking, you have your own relationship with the universe, and that's something that Scientology is telling their parishioners that that's what they're going to afford over the process of studying Scientology. Later on, there's other things. Again, I was going to do this huge long video about this, but I totally decided not to. But later on, things get a little more difficult and it'll get a little more, we'll say, sus. But in the beginning, we'll say really probably for the first couple of years of a Scientologist's life, it's really oriented towards helping them become a better person, helping them tackle issues in their marriage and their careers, in the world and society, all of those things. And I could absolutely see somebody who had the best intentions and who had a really soft heart going to Scientology because they are reportedly doing these things, right? Helping to manifest those things. I could also see somebody who was really depressed or suffered from anxiety, somebody who was going through a big transition, difficult time in their life, struggling to get control over elements in their life. I could absolutely see those types of person, that person being attracted to Scientology because Scientology offers answers and it's done as a science. So it's really easy to go from, you're having a bad day, to rooting out the cause of that bad day and anything else that might be related to that so that you can move through unencumbered. You don't have to necessarily carry the weight of those things. It's shadow work. It's the stuff that we do all the time. So I don't know. We'll go through the books. I'll talk a little bit about them, but my big thing is that I want to make clear is that I'm not teaching anybody Scientology. I am just looking at it as respectfully as I possibly can to the members. And I don't want this to, I'm not trying to slam Scientology because it's like, I'm an outlier too. I understand what it's like to have the weight of the world kind of bearing down on you because you have a strange spiritual belief. So I don't want to get at Scientologists. But I will absolutely say, if you are somebody who has some decent discernment, you'll very easily be able to see where the trappings of cult-like behavior and things are in the material. And so I don't want to go through every single book and review them, mostly because a lot of stuff is repetitive throughout each of them. And the other thing too is that I don't want to bait you into joining Scientology because there's something that might work or whatever. So it's kind of a weird thing, right? And hopefully over time, as they grow less and less powerful and it's easier to address these things publicly, we can have that discussion about how occultism really did sneak into Scientology, or really how I should say Scientology kind of grew out of occult branches that already existed. But the average Scientologist does not know this. They are not aware at all that there was any sort of magical or occult influence on what they do. They really do not know this. And if you ask people who are former Scientologists about this, they will, they don't really care because it's kind of like, okay, so L. Ron Hubbard was interested in this weird thing. He tried it, he moved on, whatever. That's not Scientology. And so for them, they don't really care, which is fine. But for the rest of us, it's a very curious thing. And anytime you talk about a cult or you talk about a spiritual group that's on the fringes in the way that they are, that are known for attacking their people who question them, who are known for not being the most pleasant people when it comes to any sort of adversarial contact. There's a lot of curiosity about what it is that these people believe. And I think that that's very logical. Again, we shall be respectful. And respectful to the people who are currently practicing in Scientology. And one of the things that always comes up in this conversation is like, how could those people be so stupid to believe? That's not fair. That's not a fair assumption at all. If you are a spiritual person and you genuinely want to invest in making the world a better place, the way that the Church of Scientology has set up their mythology and has set up their narrative is such that it would make 100% logical sense to want to walk into the doors of a Church of Scientology and study. So that's it. So that's all I got to say about that. Okay, so in Scientology, there are a lot of books, books, lectures, courses that they'd have to take, and then there's a track of counseling that happens called auditing. And it's interesting because it's the way that the terms are used are not it's not a normal usage of the terms. Like an auditor in Scientology is not the same thing as an auditor outside of Scientology. And so it's like in Scientology, an auditor is like one who listens is how they is like what they reference it as. But obviously an auditor is somebody who keeps accounts of things, which is interesting. So there's a big thing in Scientology is learning L. Ron Hubbard's vocabulary. And to the point where it's really well known and I've been kind of obsessed with them for like 20 years, like I said. So it's really well known that if you're in Scientology, you have to read this material, and if you come across any word that doesn't make sense, you have to look it up in the dictionary, even like the word "the." And so if you look like you're bored while you're studying, if you yawn, any of those things, they'll take this as you're not absorbing the material, essentially, and you'll have to go through a whole thing. Anyway, so having the exact definition in Scientology is very, very important. And so to make sure I was using the exact definition of things, I picked up the dictionary so that this stuff made sense. And it was actually really freaking helpful. It helped just because there is a lot of like acronyms, and there are a lot of terms that, again, are used very differently outside of Scientology. And that is one of the things that people reference as what makes them on the dangerous side of a cult, is that they have their own language that kind of reinforces not only the mindset, but it also reinforces a separatism from the rest of society. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But this helps us decode that. So I was going through, and it's not that like, I don't know. The language, like, there's a couple of things in the writings of L. Ron Hubbard in general that are a little annoying to me. Like, everything is in the masculine, and so it's always humans see a human sees his blah 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 instead of a human sees their. There's like no reference of women unless it's used in very specific sense. It's all he does this, man does this. And it's all in the masculine. And so that's a kind of an interesting thing that like even doesn't really happen so much in the Bible. And so there's that. But I mean, not as much as it does like in Scientology. It's like every other paragraph is he this, man this, da da da. So it's a lot of I would say for being as progressive as they represent, it doesn't feel that way. And one thing about the stuff in Scientology, there is no like new material coming out. L. Ron Hubbard is dead, and what he wrote is the work. And so there isn't room for like reinterpretation, and they're really big on cutting that out. In fact, that's actually one of the reasons I couldn't go through and talk about each of the books in depth. Why I don't want to, or I'm a little worried about it rather, is because they look at any sort of interpretation of the work that isn't directly what L. Ron Hubbard wrote and taught is like blasphemy. It's very bad. And there's actually a policy letter that tells Scientologists to go after people who are doing that. And so me comparing what I'm reading here or what I saw and trying to like do a decent contrast to what goes on in other occult traditions is really borderline that. And so that's why I'm like, no, we're just going to talk about it kind of abstractly, as much as that sucks, but that's kind of what we have to do here. So there's a lot of learning their speech that happens. So Dianetics is where it all starts. And there's actually 3 Dianetics books. And there's the one that everybody knows, but then once you get into like to Scientology, start working around, you get 2 other kind of backups to that. And then later on, a new version of Dianetics is offered. So like that's a whole thing. And Dianetics is basically self-auditing. It's a lot, and you can work with a partner, and they totally want you to work with a partner when you do Dianetics. But the idea is you're going through it and you're spotting areas in your life that have caused you stress, and you're working them out of your system so that they're not overriding your thought processes or influencing the way that you're interacting with other people. And that's actually really very helpful stuff. Like just in general, like as a human being living with other human beings, like it's actually quite helpful. A lot of communication skills, things like that. And then you get into the other 2 Dianetics books, and they go further into what he's talking about in Dianetics, and then there's a lot of regurgitation of stuff that was in Dianetics, just kind of presented in a new way, and you start to get more of the like abbreviations and things in that material. So that's obviously more marketed towards people who are interested in taking Scientology further or getting serious. Just because you're reading Dianetics and applying Dianetics doesn't mean you're on the bridge yet. And that the bridge to total freedom, which is basically the levels of initiation, essentially, that you walk your way up through. And so the basics are Dianetics, we'll call it 1, 2, and 3, which really it's like Dianetics theory and something, original theory is the second one, and then there's like Dianetics 8088 or something like that. So you've got like these three basic Dianetic books in the beginning. And then you move on to the work of like the pre-clear stuff. And so that is Self-Analysis by L. Ron Hubbard, Scientology, A New Slant on Life, The Handbook for Pre-Clears, The Creation of Human Ability, which was actually pretty interesting for what he was trying to get. Scientology 08, the Book of Basics, and then there's Scientology, A History of Man, and there's actually a couple more that I don't have currently with me. I either have in digital form or I was just not going to go there because I didn't need to. But anyway, so these books all kind of outline that basic, like the basic fundamental stuff in Scientology, and it's like helpful stuff. Like the History of Man's really interesting. It's things are like the idea in Scientology that you are a multi-lifetime being is really important, and so there is this belief in reincarnation. Scientologists, when they went public and officially like started calling themselves a church and a religion, referred to themselves as being closely related to the schools of Dharma, which are like Buddhist teachings. And this is probably the closest thing to it, is that like they believe in reincarnation. Otherwise, and there's actually a book or there's a lecture later on that's like way down the road where I'm pretty sure it's a lecture where L. Ron Hubbard says that he is the reincarnation of Buddha. So you get this, like, they very much are glomming onto Eastern philosophy and kind of doing what white people do a lot when they do that, take the things and leave what actually is going on and then just say something else. So, but you can really see that in the stuff of the idea of reincarnation. Reincarnation it's interesting. So, and it's very self-hypnosis, the kind of approach to it, because the idea is like doing what's essentially past life recall work while going through an auditing session and figuring out where like trouble sources and engrams and other things were kind of placed in the reactive mind, which is essentially the subconscious. It's like it's a different version of the subconscious, but it's essentially the subconscious. And going through it and getting rid of those things. So it's a lot like, again, shadow work. You're going through Like we would, how we would work at like past life regression, right? So for my example of that, my first time doing it, I was having trouble getting a book published. And so I had a past life regression done. I went back, found a lifetime where I was actually killed as a reporter during Prohibition. I thought this was all stupid and made up. I thought it was whatever. I walk out of the experience, and then suddenly the weird issue I had was just gone. Like, just gone. And so I became a believer very much in past life regression and doing these things. And that's basically what they're doing. They're going through finding these issues, these trouble areas in life, and then in past life regression and in just regular auditing, which is not past life regression, figuring out where those things are and then kind of unworking them. It's shadow work. And that's the idea that this is something that ultimately is a multi-lifetime issue where you've got things that can glom onto you. That's like revealed more and more over time as you're kind of working through Scientology. But I digress. So out of all of it, like, there are some really useful things. I think the stuff that's the most useful is stuff that has to do with how you are going to interact with other people. So like the communication stuff, once you actually get into it, it's actually pretty helpful. It's the idea of just being aware of other people, being aware of what they're capable of, being aware of what you're capable of, being aware of your pet peeves, your propensities, things like that. All normal. It's stuff that if you go to a communications class, you're going to get. If you take a public speaking class, you're going to get a lot of this kind of stuff just presented to you without all the fluff. But there is a lot of, in my opinion, it's a lot of like self-hypnosis and basic kind of occultism that's painted over with common sense. And this is where people I online, especially on like Reddit and things, tend to get like kind of frustrated, is that a lot of the stuff that he teaches, like when it comes to like communication with your partners or communication at work or any of that kind of stuff, it's all just really basic stuff repackaged and presented in a way that is costing you more money, is basically the idea. And I would have to agree with that. It's a lot of basic common sense stuff. There's a lot of like, I feel like if you are somebody who needs to be grabbed by the hand and walked through the thought process of how do I unfuck myself, okay, this is what this stuff is doing. It's walking you through that process. The problem that I find with that is there's not any really good answers that don't involve the application of further Scientology to fix those problems. And that's something I have kind of an issue with. Like, if as an occultist, if I was like doing a ritual and I was trying to absolve myself of something, or I was trying to work through something, and the only thing that I got back was more magic, like, you need to do more magic, do more ritual, do more this, do it, and that was the continuation for like several years, I would have an issue with that, because it's not going anywhere. There's no like real tangible stuff. And even the stuff that is tangible, because again, there's helpful stuff in there, even the stuff that is tangible, it immediately, in my opinion, starts to isolate you. Isolate your emotional intelligence. That's a big part of a lot of the communication skills, essentially, is isolating or remapping your emotional intelligence. And that is very harmful for people who don't necessarily have issues with their emotional intelligence. If there's like a block there or a disability or something, that's like one thing. But to take the average person and then to kind of start chipping away at their emotional intelligence and then kind of reorienting it, adding new terminology, taking certain things out, saying certain things don't matter where other things do, and it all becomes isolating. And I don't like when spirituality becomes isolating. I think if your spirituality takes you to a place of isolation as like an individual, like, that's great. Like, go be a pilgrim, go have your vision quest on a mountain, go do those things. If, however, the tradition itself is built on isolating you emotionally and kind of separating you from your family, then I think there's a problem. So one of the things that is often talked about with Scientology is the suppressive person issue, where somebody can be declared a suppressive person. And suppressive people are essentially people who are keeping you from being able to move through the ranks of your progress on the bridge. And it's really worded that way. These are people who, like, for example, a story from somebody in my own life, like, for example, going to one of the churches because you're having issues in life, and then you're told through a series of auditing that, like, the real problem is your kids, or the real problem is your wife, and then being told you have to break up with your wife, or you have to stop talking to your kids if you want to continue your progress as a person trying to better themselves. And if you're in a really screwed up place in life, you're totally going to do it. And because you're looking for answers, and if those people are, if they emotionally are hurtful to you, or it's a negative situation, then yeah, it's really easy to be like, nope, I don't want you here. This is keeping me from what I want to do. And sometimes that's an important thing. Sometimes you got to take a step back. I'm all here for chosen family and all of those things, and I respect that. In the case of Scientology, it all implies the further use of Scientology. So again, it's not like even for your good, it's for your good in Scientology. And that's a problem. And that's the stuff that I start to have an issue with. So when you read about suppressive people, which at the very least I can tell you is right here in the dictionary. So the word suppress means to squash, to sit on, to make smaller, to refuse to let reach, to make a person uncertain about reaching, to render or lessen in any way possible, by any means possible, to the harm of the individual and for the fancied protection of a suppressor. A suppressive act, according to L. Ron Hubbard, are actions or omissions undertaken knowingly to suppress, reduce, or impede Scientology or Scientologists. Such actions are high crimes and result in the dismissal from Scientology and its organizations. Then there are suppressive persons or groups. A person or group of persons who actively seek to suppress or damage Scientology or a Scientologist by suppressive acts. See also potential trouble source. So it's normal in certain therapy situations, which Scientology hates psychiatry, In fact, a lot of what L. Ron Hubbard was at least appearing to do with Dianetics was kind of trying to take over the course of what psychology was doing. And as somebody with a psychology background, though it's not a big one, but I do have it, that's just mind-boggling to me. But yeah, so a lot of what he's doing is trying to supplant psychology and therapeutic actual therapy and therapeutic practices and things like that, and that's frustrating and very uncomfortable because he makes no qualms about how evil the psychiatry industry is, and the base idea that they just want to drug everybody, and they keep people in this kind of base state of survival that keeps the world in this dark place. He has a lot of thoughts about psychology, and it's very clear in all these books. So I don't know. I have to say that after I've been so curious for so long, and I have had all of I've read everything that's come out about them. I have listened to every podcast. I've watched all the documentaries. I send money to organizations for survivors of Scientology. I am a big, I'm into it. There's a part of me that for some reason has always been very curious and very invested. And it all started, I will end the video with this. It all started when I had to do a world, religion conference kind of thing in Columbus, Ohio. And I want to say it was 2007 or 2008. And I was there to be the occult witch guy. And there were religious booths set up for different religions and different spiritual traditions from literally all over the world, everything. It was amazing. And we were at the fairgrounds in Columbus, Ohio. And there were the Scientologists. They had a booth there. And I was, again, I'm curious, right? And there's all these books, and it's cool because like it's cool in the fact that, again, I like sci-fi. I love me some sci-fi. So what I actually see when I walk in are like sci-fi books, and I'm like, ooh, that's cool. So I walk over, and then I see it's L. Ron Hubbard, and then the name like lodges in my head, and I go, oh yeah. And I look up in Scientology, because of course it's a Dianetics booth. It wasn't a Scientology booth until you look closer, and then the word Scientology was there. But it was really about Dianetics. And I start talking to this guy who was the rep for Scientology. And everything's like really cool. Like, he's a really nice person. It was odd in the sense that there was this like kind of distance behind his eyes, that as though he was kind of playing a part, or as if he was kind of acting. But he seemed very nice, and I'm thinking like, okay, you know, we're in this weird setting where everybody's talking about their spirituality, and I know Scientology has kind of a weird reputation, so he's probably on edge. And so we start talking, and I start to feel like, oh, he's genuinely like being honest and and connecting to me. I must have been there for about 25 minutes at this point. He's being very open about things. And so I finally just say, so what's with this Xenu thing? And it was like, you know, before there was maybe a foot of distance behind his eyes. When I asked that question, he like snaps back, and there's 100 miles of distance. And I can just feel he is no longer happy with me or this conversation. He's very uncomfortable. And he just is, there's no such thing. It's all made up, and it's just the media trying to hurt us. And I was like, oh, okay. And at the time, we didn't really know a whole lot about things. This was 2007. This was like moons ago. And so we didn't really know a whole lot about how things worked and whatnot. So we just knew that Xenu was a thing, right? And so I respectfully left, and I walked away, and I just had this sadness, I guess, in me afterwards. Like, after my interaction with him, just realizing that, like, he obviously couldn't say something. He obviously felt on edge about explaining things in a way that I don't feel people should be if they're excited about their spirituality. And I wasn't like grilling him in a bad way. I was asking him like really nice questions. Like, honestly, like I was being kind. Why wouldn't I be, right? And so the interaction there was kind of a weird one, and it stuck with me. And then years and years later, I have another run-in with somebody who was a Scientologist, very similar experience. They kind of snapped back, and I didn't even ask them about Xenu, but they didn't like snap back, and there's just this weird thing that happens, and I that sticks with me, just the dissonance, right? So anyway, so I got these books, and I got them, again, kind of on a half accident. I was shopping on eBay at night when I shouldn't have been. But the other part, I've always been really curious, and I know that a lot of people who are in the spiritual world are also very curious about what's going on in Scientology that makes people want to stay. And I can tell you, it's actually pretty well thought out self-help stuff that, unfortunately, it's packaged in such a way that it is very, very possible with the material to 100% entrap people in a cycle of almost a never-ending cycle of introspection that I think is really damaging and would be very damaging for like the average person. And then you add on all of the other stuff, the political stuff that happens inside of Scientology, the policies, the recording people in their auditing sessions, the collecting of material to blackmail people. Like, all of this stuff is real. It's out there in spades. It's scary, right? Because it's I feel like it takes the good stuff out of self-help and the good stuff out of the occult and actually makes it creepy. I mean, it actually makes it something where it's delivered in such an innocent way, but it very clearly is laying the groundwork for a lot of self-deception, for a lot of isolation, and those are things that I just think are scary as a spiritual person. So there's that. Now, I also have a bunch of courses and lectures that I got in that lot, and these things are like epic. So I'm just gonna open this. It's this huge, like, it's big. and you open them up. It broke during shipping, but you open it up. There's CD lectures. It comes with transcript of the lecture, and then there's like a workbook, and like it's a lot of stuff. So, and I have 11 of these, and there's more. There's like way more. There's so many more. And I don't know what I'm necessarily going to do with them, because I've started some of them I went through, but a lot of it's just not interested in it. It's just kind of boring to me. A lot of it's boring to me because it's like the lectures are just kind of a lot of regurgitation of the same material, just kind of thrown around and kind of dramified in some ways. And then there are lectures to like Congress. That was a whole thing. And so it's just a lot of rehashing of the same material, and it's all done in this like guise of like human rights, and it's so obviously created by a storyteller. As a storyteller and as somebody who writes occult nonfiction, it's really easy to tell that it's a religion created by a sci-fi writer. So anyway, so I've got these lectures. I'm going to I will listen to them. I will go through them. Again, it's not like a priority of mine, so I might make another video many moons from now where I go into what's inside of those things. But I can tell you that I have looked at the basics of Scientology. I can see that there are potentially a lot of really wonderful things that could be really beneficial for people. It's just that unfortunately the tone is kind of, it's awful. Like, again, it's all in the masculine. It's very like, ugh. And it's very, the tone is very, it's not balanced. It's not like, it's very directory, and it's very directorial, and it's all knowing in a way that it just really shouldn't be. I think it's gross when people talk about spirituality in an all-knowing sense. That is definitely his MO. And yeah, so I don't know. Like I said, I think there's a lot of things that could be helpful for people. I think that if it was in another universe, right? Like maybe Scientology isn't run by creepy people who want to hurt people and take over the world. But that's not the world we got. The world we got right now is people who actually have some pretty cool stuff and are using it to hurt people. So there's that. Anyway, don't join Scientology is my advice. And if you want to know what's in the books, you actually can just go to eBay and buy these things yourselves. I didn't spend any money on the church itself. I got most of this stuff from an estate sale, where it was somebody who was a Scientologist and they died and their kids sold off their stuff. So at least no money went directly to the church. And you'd be surprised. Like, so if you go to the Church of Scientology, these books are going to be anywhere from like $25 to like $50. And I got them for like $4 a pop, basically, is what it kind of spread out to be. So for all of this, like, I mean, some of these courses are like several $100s. Some of them are up there in like the thousands. And you can get them very cheap on eBay. So go do it. I did not get an e-meter. One day I would like to have an e-meter just to play with it, because when I did play with it at the convention thing, it was kind of fun. And I like sci-fi, so I think it's cool. But I don't have one of those, and you do get to a point where you can't progress without an e-meter. So, there's that. I think I've probably done everything I can do, at least reading through the material, without having an e-meter myself. And yeah, and I will say the auditing stuff, like the self-auditing stuff, it's kind of cool. But it's also just... It's if you can journal and you can take a writing prompt, you can probably do everything that you're doing with this. It's just it's a set of specific questions that are asked in a specific way. There you go. Or actions that are presented in a certain way. So, you can do it by yourself. You don't need to go into Scientology to find what Scientology is talking about. I think that's what I'm trying to tell you. You don't have to become a Scientologist in order to do what they're doing. In fact, you're probably already doing what they're doing, but in a way that's not or like bad. And so just keep doing what you're doing and trust that like these are people who need more instruction, right? And because they need more instruction, and because they're in that place where they're not necessarily looking for answers in the way that we would ask as like spiritual seekers, doesn't mean that they're anything other than people who aren't capable of discerning things in a way that is healthy for them. We'll just leave it at that. I'm trying to be nice and high vibrational here, but yeah. So there's a lot there. So much is going on in Scientology right now. It's a hot topic again. It seems like every other year something big happens in Scientology, whether it's Tom Cruise jumping on a couch or this guy recently getting convicted of sexual abuse, and the church obviously being part of covering that up and shaming the women. There's a lot of dark stuff that's there. So it's not worth going into Scientology, but I would say what the Scientologists are practicing, like the everyday Scientologists, the ones who aren't part of all the nefarious stuff, pretty decent actually. I wish them the best, and I hope that anybody who does engage and study Scientology or consider themselves to be a Scientologist can get to a point where they can no longer reconcile the crimes that are being committed inside the church by the church and the church's mission. And I think once that happens, people can actually see that, like, no, we're supposed to be, because again, the everyday Scientologist is very invested in helping people and doing good. And I think if that veneer can be removed and they can see, or that barrier rather can be removed, and they can actually start to see and notice what is really going on, that a lot of the stuff would stop. So there's a lot of what goes on in Scientology that feels anathema to what they claim to be their mission. So there's that. Anyway, that's my 2 cents about that. This is my Scientology book haul. Interesting. I will probably be reading this stuff on and off over the years, because it's definitely a lot of the like documentaries I've watched, like a lot of it just makes sense now, just because I've read the stuff and now I understand, like, oh, this connects to this and this is what. But it's I don't know. I would say, like, keep studying your OTO home course, or like do some shadow work and listen to some guided meditations, and you'll be fine. Like, you're getting what they're getting out of Scientology. Find a good community who is supportive. That's the other thing too, is the Scientology communities tend to be very, like, supportive of each other. So I think that's another thing that's keeping people there. And reading this material and moving through, is that there's this big support system for Scientologists inside of Scientology that doesn't necessarily exist outside of it. So if you're like a free-thinking spiritual person, that might be interesting to you. So go find a coven instead. I said it. Anyway, that's it. Like, subscribe, join my newsletter, and I'll be back next week with more stuff.